This is the Runaway Slave Channel with the Rastafari International Ambassador, the man from Bakawal, the man from Boswak, JahBunny, the runaway slave, better known as the badass. Don't get him proud.
Yes, I am Congo. The issue there are back with is this. When in the dark days, when we just
children no cry. None my Jah children no cry. None my Jah children no cry. For he wives, they weep in her eyes. Yes, he wives, they weep in her eyes. So none of Jah children no cry. No cry, no cry. None of Jah children no cry. No cry no more. None of Jah children no cry. None of Jah children no cry.
abolition of slavery in Ethiopia. February 14, 2012. In my journey, in my January 31st, 2012 post, Ethiopia, Emperor and Slavery, I briefly discussed slavery in Ethiopia and the unsuccessful attempt made by various emperors to rid the country of the institution through the reign of Emperor Menelik II, 1889 to 1913. In this post, I have highlighted effective measures that were put in place mainly during Emperor Haile Selassie reign that have led to the eventual abolition of slavery in 1942. Emperor Haile Selassie had a twofold diagnosis as to why his predecessors' effort to curb or end slavery had failed. A combination of failure to put in place enforcement mechanism to accompany numerous laws issued over the years, and the enormity of the problem due to the fact that slavery was deeply rooted in tradition. Haile Selassie, Volume 1, page 80, Volume 2, page 175. He was convinced that it was impossible to uproot such an ancient institution simply by writing laws. He also feared that sudden end to slavery would create an influx of large underclass with no means to support itself. That would have created 2 million destitute people overnight. Pankhurst, 1968, page 118. Common Platt, page 164. Thus was going to be a deliberate process including substantive law and tough enforcement mechanism that would gradually put the institution of slavery out of commission. The most serious lawmaking the beginning and the end of the institution of slavery in Ethiopia came in the 1920s. It is true that by that time Ethiopia had little choice but to effectively tackle the slavery problem, which has remained endemic. By 1922, Ethiopia had come under unrelenting pressure to end slavery from Western news, media, particularly the British press, as well as anti-slavery groups such as the Anti-Slavery and Aborigine Protection Society. That was not all. Ethiopia also needs to show result in its fight to end slavery so as to deny European powers an excuse they could use to take it over. Particularly Britain, France, and Italy, whose colony all the time surrounded it. After all, that was the motive, page 303, behind the 1906 Tripartite Treaty signed among those countries. This was particularly true for Britain, whose opposition to slavery in Ethiopia was based primarily on imperialist and strategic design, and Italy, which in addition to its territorial desire was also itching for a payback for the thorough defeat it suffered in the hand of the Ethiopian in 1896 in the Battle of Adawa. More importantly, though, Ethiopia had to start taking concrete measures to end slavery because it was one of the conditions for its admission to the League of Nations, a club of civilized nations, in September 1923. Encyclopedia, page 681. As part of this agreement, Ethiopia was required to phase out slavery over a 10-year period, at the end of which it had to abolish it completely. Fortunately, these continued pressure from outside coincide with suitable local conditions in which slavery had become less economically tenable and unfashionable due to the changing lifestyle of the ruling class, making the task feasible, if not easy. Although Emperor Haile Selassie had already taken various measures to enforce existing anti-slavery law, the first in a series of legislation issued during his reign come on September 23, 1923. The emperor, then Rastafari, issued a proclamation outlawing slave reading and imposing a duty on administrative to enforce the proclamation under the penalty of the law. Pankhurst, 1968, page 113, 114. The proclamation made slavery reading a capital offense. It also imposed strict liability and local authority in which governors, chief, and headsman would be liable to a steep fine for every slave stolen from their area. In addition, this proclamation stated that every slave taken from its country would be eligible for a warrant of freedom and would maintain the right to return home. This was followed by another law in March 1924, which was amended in July 1931, in which the emperor sought to gradually emancipate slaves in the country and abolish slavery, the Emancipation Law. Many of the provisions in this law were not new. For instance, provision on emancipation of slaves who had become clerk, who had fought in wars, or who had saved their master life were already part of existing law. The Fatanagas 177. However, the lack of effective control of the central government in many parts of the country and the fact that people in places of authority, including judge and village chief, were also slave owners, had made the enforcement of existing law impossible. The Emancipation Law sought to remedy that by putting in place strict enforcement mechanism. To that end, it introduced a mandate for the registration of all slaves and the establishment of special slavery court that would be subject to supervision of central government. Inspectors 56 special judges were appointed in different parts of the country, and a department whose main function was to supervise the proper implementation of law was established in the capital, a sign of the emperor's determination to ensure the effective enforcement of its law. The Emancipation Law also included provision that made it easy for slaves to seek emancipation immediately. It did this in part by stacking procedural hurdle against slave owner. For instance, it provides that if a slave escaped, she could only be legally captured by their master or by authorized custom officially at the border. If a master failed to claim a runaway slave captured by authorized official within 8 days, the slave would be emancipated. If a master captured a runaway slave, she could not take the slave back directly. Rather, she had to go through a court process where an inquiry would be made as to the reason that led the slave to attempt escape. In addition, it gave slaves legal standing to sue their master for maltreatment if it was found that a master had indeed mistreated his or her slave. The master would get one warning. A finding of a second offense would result in the emancipation of the slave. Pankhurst, 1968, page 144. More notable were, however, the three provisions in the Emancipation Law that sought to gradually abolish slavery within one generation. One of these provisions banned the transfer of slaves from one person to another, including amongst them relatives. Another mandate that slaves be emancipated within a year after the death of their master. Although the initial language of the law allowed for slaves to be inherited for a maximum of 7 years, after the death of their master, this was eliminated by the 1931 amendment, leaving only 1 year as a transition period before a slave whose master had died could be freed. Finally, the law mandates that all children born to slaves who in the past automatically become slaves were free. The law also includes provision and welfare of emancipated slave. It extends to emancipated slave at 7-year tax holiday, an attempt designed to give free slave the opportunity to get on their feet. It also gave emancipated slave the right to education and the right to work, including the right to join the military and the civil service. Although reform was apparently not enough to prevent Italy from using the issue as one of its justification for its second Ethiopian invasion in 1935, the issue proved a reliable propaganda tool to convince the world that Ethiopia was indeed not a civilized nation and therefore did not deserve to be treated like one. It did not help its case that Ethiopia had not abolished slavery 12 years into its membership in the League. 2 years past the agreed term, Italy invaded Ethiopia in October 1935 and issued two laws in October 1935 and in October 1935 and in April 1936. Emancipating slaves in the country, according to Italy's account during its brief occupation of Ethiopia, it freed 424,000 slaves. After Italy defeating World War II and its return from exile in Britain, Emperor Haile Selassie changed gear and abandoned its plan to phase out slavery over an extended period of time in favor of one that resembled Italy immediately and complete abrogation. It seems that the lack of any significant backlash from the passage of law against slavery by Italy during the brief occupation of Ethiopia had convinced Haile Selassie that his fear of possible negative impact that may result from an immediately abolition was unfounded. The emperor therefore issued the Slave Abolition Proclamation number 22 of 1942 in August that year. The 1942 proclamation declared that the legal status of slavery is abolished and imposed harsh penalty on persons who participate in transporting of persons out of Ethiopia so that they could be sold as slaves. Participating in slave dealing prevented slaves from asserting their freedom or participating in the pawning off of people. The 1942 proclamation was later replaced by the Penal Code number 158 of 1957, which was then repealed by the law currently in force. The Criminal Code of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, number 414 of 2024, both of which include a provision banning slavery and imposing harsh penalty for its violation. The following material from the Library of Congress collective were used in preparing this reasoning. Now, it has just come to my attention that slavery was officially banned in Ethiopia in 1942. So now, all this talk about Africa, Ethiopia, the place of freedom and all this thing that we have been talking, Now, mother like you come talk to me and make me know and understand now differently. Because if Ethiopia is the last place to free slavery in Africa, then something drastically right now wrong with where we are preach and where we are teach. No.
This station, the slave station, is no police station, no train station, no bus station. Calling all bad slaves from long gone till nigh. Slaves that recognize their culture, never bend, never bow. Never listen to Babylonian philosophy, but interested in mother earth and mother life and mother liberty. All bad slaves tune in to the badass station, JahBunny station.